just general brothers of the Lord, for whatever reason, all he was doing is segmenting out the types of Christians that were there. You say that Mark doesn't talk about a pre-existent Jesus at all. You do mention the adoptionism when he was baptized, and what I would say is that in the picture that particular part paints has the Holy Spirit or some entity coming down from heaven to adopt him or inhabit him. And so I would say that there's no direct pre-existent Jesus in Mark, but I would also say that I didn't argue that Mark has a pre-existent Jesus in it. And I would say that the adoptionism in general is kind of a pre-existent kind of doctrine, but anyways, I didn't argue that Mark has a pre-existent Jesus in it. You state that there's an Isaiah prophecy in Mark, and what I technically said was that it was a mishmash of prophecies because they actually pulled from different prophecies from the Old Testament in Isaiah. And while Mark specifies Isaiah, later Gospels come back and try to correct that by saying, by just generalizing prophecies in the Old Testament. So there's that. You also talk about Herodotus and Alexander the Great. For one thing, we're not talking about these particular, sources or whatnot. I know you're trying to bring them up to contrast them with this. I'm not saying that merely because they are mythical, that doesn't mean that Jesus didn't exist or probably didn't exist or anything like that. I am saying that because these things are mythical, we can't trust them to have any kind of actual historical evidence for the particular figure of Christ. And I think that is a little bit different than saying that they don't contain any kind of historical information at all. You bring up P52, and I do believe that P52 is a fragment and not an entire gospel. So, saying that you have one fragment that comports with part of I believe that's Gospel of John, does not necessarily mean that the entire things, the entire Gospels are transmitted reliably.
1 minute.
So, and then you brought up 1 Thessalonians 2:14 through 16. And, maybe we can go back and forth on this later, but I know that's kind of an extensive conversation. The Mark's brothers verse that you brought up, I would say is not actually proof that he had brothers or anything like that. I still think that that's a theological thing that was meant to teach a lesson about how Christians are consider each other in the Christian faith. I did notice that you corrected me on a couple of my references, notably Hebrews and Ephesians, and I probably just went on just a copying spree without regard to which ones were actually written by Paul. So my bad about that. I am wrong about that. And then, so you brought up a lot of different Bible verses. Maybe we can go through those later. You said that Paul doesn't contain a celestial Jesus, but it's pretty obvious that he does. You say John is an independent source, and I think I gave pretty reasonable answers for why he's not actually an independent source.
Tom.
Yeah.
All right. This will be the last 5-minute round, and then we will open it up for discussion between the two of them. Let me reiterate once more. Please make sure that we don't interrupt. Let the other person finish out. That time is coming. Just make sure that they get to say what they want to say, especially when it's their round. All right. Chris, your time begins now.
Yeah, I want to apologize, Godless. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply that you were only using Wikipedia. I just meant that you could go look up the percentages there. That's all I meant. I was not trying to insult you in any way, shape, or form, so I apologize if I came off that way. why is it? I didn't find your answer as to why Cephas is not a brother of the Lord that convincing. Because there's other because like when you assumed that Cephas was higher up on the chain. Actually, in other sources like the Book of Acts and such, we learned that James was considered head of the Church of Jerusalem in Judea. So why is it? Why I don't understand how Cephas would be considered higher up on the chain of command, especially when Paul notably actually tries putting Cephas in his place numerous times as well. Also, then there's the problem that he also brings up the Apostle John and a few others. He doesn't refer to John as a brother of the Lord. There's the issue that actually I wanted to respond when you said that at the baptism, the Spirit in Mark descends on Jesus, and I guess you seem to imply became part of him. Is that correct?
I said that it inhabits him. Like,
okay.
Adopts him.
I want to know where that is. I'm going to read the passage. At the time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Just as Jesus was coming out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." At once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and the angels attended him. Where does it say it inhabited him?
It does. Save that for the back and forth, Chris.
Yeah. Anyways, it doesn't say it inhabited him at all. Actually, it implies that it sent him out into the wilderness. It's a separate being from him. I did not find your argument against John that strong. Just because sources existed before him doesn't mean that he was using them, especially because we don't really have much evidence that he was using at least any of our New Testament writings that we have. He definitely didn't feel the need to copy the synoptics. How much time do I have?
You have 1 minute and 45 seconds left.
Okay, so where else? Honestly, actually, I don't have much else. I just want to apologize again if I was for interrupting, and because if it made me seem like I was trying to insinuate you were just
like
using Wikipedia, because that's not at all.
You did.
Yeah,
you did.
Yeah, I wasn't trying.
No, you're good.
I apologize, Godless.
All right, G. Let me reset your clock real quick. And your 5 minutes will start now.
Well, just like you pointed out the Alexander the Great and Herodotus, I'll point out other external references to Jesus that we do actually find. None of those specifically state that they're using any Christian sources or anything like that, but it's pretty obvious that they actually do use Christian sources. Because of not only how late they are, but because of the information that they actually present in it. Like, for instance, with Mar Bar Serapion, he actually blames the Jews for killing Jesus instead of the Romans. So, I mean, that's one way that we know that Mar Bar Serapion was getting his information from an existing Christian community, whether it was oral theology or written documents. It doesn't matter. We know because of what's in it that he was getting it from there. So it's not so much that we definitely know in any kind of case, because in history we don't really know definitely about any of this. I would say that it's more probable that John got his information from the existing Christian community that was there in the 2nd century, rather than him being an eyewitness, considering the amount of time between it. There's just there's nothing to say that he was working off of firsthand sources to inform it, because of how late it was. So there's that. And then you kind of have a problem with naming specific apostles and then just calling James, brother of the Lord. Now, I didn't say – I said that Cephas was higher up on the ladder than James that's in Galatians 1:19, but I don't think that is actually James the Just. James the Just is later named, but this particular James is not James the Just. He's not described that way in any kind of form. Plus, in order for you to argue against him just being a regular Christian, you have to ignore the theology that Paul has surrounding brothers of the Lord. Sans the mistaken passages that I cited earlier, all of those plus many more show how Paul considered just regular baptized Christians to be brothers and sisters of the Lord. So you have to completely ignore his whole theology on brother, like what it means to be in the family of God or to be a brother or sister of Christ. And then you had a problem with Cephas not being a brother of the Lord. He doesn't say that Cephas isn't a brother of the Lord. He just lists James as a regular Christian, sans that the other apostles, and then Cephas, which he seems to know, or at least have a better rapport built with him, just like with John and the other apostles that you named specifically. And so, yeah, I don't have anything else that he really cited. I don't think I apologized earlier for including the wrong verses or whatnot, but yeah, I was wrong in that. You were right, and I totally love that you corrected me on it.
All right, and now we will we'll go into the discussion round. Chris, since it seemed like you had a question a few minutes ago, and since G just went, we'll let you kick it off with the question that you wanted to ask a little bit ago. And just ask that you don't talk over each other and let each other finish your sentences, and then we won't have a problem. Cool.
Okay, so yeah, the one I wanted to first ask is, where does it imply that the Spirit inhabited Jesus in Mark's baptism?
Well, I didn't specifically say that the text says that it inhabited him. I said that the picture that the text paints seems to show the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit, descending from heaven and inhabiting him. So unless Jesus is seeing a ghost or something like that, I mean, this Spirit has to be somewhere to direct him or whatever. But the general adoptionist view is that Jesus, when he was baptized, was adopted into the sonship of God by the Messiah basically inhabiting his body. Now, it doesn't have to directly use the word inhabit in order for that to happen.
Okay. The issue I see with that, though, is that did the other angels inhabit him as well that are in the passage?
No.
Was he just inhabited by a clan? Because it mentions that there were other angels with him that attended him.
Well, I mean, look, if you're going to ask me a question, at least allow me to actually answer.
Sorry.
Or should I keep talking until you start talking for like a few minutes? Okay, so I didn't say that a whole harem of angels inhabited his asshole, okay? What I said was that this pre-existent Messiah figure inhabited his body as if to adopt him as the Son of God. I mean, there is a pre-existent Messiah in the Gospel of John, which I would say you can't have for a historical source, but for a theological source, it's definitely a good source for that. The very first few verses of John has that this Christ figure was a pre-existent figure. He was there with God at the beginning of the universe. So it's painfully obvious that this entire theology was around at the time of Mark, and Mark has an adoptionist view of Jesus. And the adoptionist view is that the Messiah inhabited this Jesus figure in order to do all the things he did on earth. That's why his birth isn't miraculous. That's why Mark doesn't cover his birth or anything like that.
Okay, so then my question then is, why is the Spirit depicted as apart from him, sending him into the wilderness?
Well, I mean, in the Gospel of Mark,